a barge during rush hour. In that case, 35 people were killed. Joining us right now, an attorney who worked on litigation surrounding that collapse 44 years ago, Steve Yerrid. Good to see you, Stephen. I mean, was this a little deja vu for you when you saw what had happened in Baltimore earlier in the week?
It was deja vu. Believe me, I can tell you, when I saw this, it was like watching a repeat performance of something I'll never forget. But the real problem here was the foreseeability. You see, 1980 was not just a tragedy. It took down 35 people's lives. It was a lesson. It was a lesson that tragedies like this don't have to occur. And the lesson wasn't taught. Because the bridge in Baltimore, the Key Bridge, was built in 1977. At that time, it was a fair critical bridge, meaning if any of the pilings got hit, any of the foundation piers got hit, that bridge was coming down in totality. It was going to be a catastrophe. So instead of rebuilding the bridge at great cost, there's a lot of old superstructures in America, unfortunately. Bridges are left for a long time for lack of funds, lack of foresight. But that does not excuse the fact that in 1980, the Baltimore transportation officials went on record with the Baltimore Sun saying that if such a collision would happen with that structure, the Key Bridge, the bridge would come down. The bigger question for America and for people watching this program, all across America, with bridges that are antiquated, that are old, why weren't safety precautions done? And someone has said, I think Secretary Buttigieg said that safety would not enter into it because a bridge of that size with the magnitude of that ship, 5 times now because of modern shipping, 5 times larger than the Summit Venture, which hit the Skyway Bridge, would not sustain the collision. Okay, I understand that.
I was going to say, that sounds reasonable though, right? Because we're talking about vessels now that are so much larger than, you know, in the 70s when this bridge was built. But I think I hear you on where you're going. You're talking potentially about the protections around those pillars, like fenders, etc. Why is it in this case, why in this case they weren't put into place as we saw in some other bridges across the country? So will that be a consideration made when the questions of accountability are already underway and people want to know, why weren't those protections in place? Would it have made a difference? Is that going to be at the core of potential challenges that might come, legal challenges that may come from, say, the family members of the 6 who were killed here, or perhaps those in the shipping industry who are going to want to say, we want accountability for the many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars lost and not being able to transport items. Is that what you see coming?
Frederica, you've got it right on the point. You've got it right on the money. The problem, money, that's a hell of a thing to say, but the problem is safety measures. I understand that ships are larger. I get that. And they're of great, enormous magnitude. I get that too. But so is technology. We have a pier structure around the Skyway Bridge, which is a template for safe bridge construction all over the world. There's no reason in the world why safety precautions could not have been implemented in 44 years after that lesson in 1980 was taught. 44 years. And if engineers say that that's not possible, they would never work for me. Anything is possible like that. Building, John Lero, God bless him, he said it best, ships can't go where there's no water. Another additional safety, in addition to the dolphins, those are the large structures, the round structures, would be spoil islands. And people say, oh, no, spoil islands would be a hazard to navigation. It's easy to be a doomsayer. It's very hard to be a safety pioneer. It doesn't take a real rocket scientist or an engineer to figure out that ships can be protected from striking bridges. Should it be a terrorist attack? Should it be inclement weather like the Skyway? Should it be human error? Or in this case, most likely, mechanical and electrical failure. When a ship loses power and steerage, the collision is virtually inevitable. And with ships of that size, as you pointed out, the aftermath of such a collision is often death and destruction, total destruction. If this had been rush hour in Baltimore, I went to Georgetown Law School. If this had been rush hour in Baltimore, the Key Bridge would have been packed with passerbyers, transiting people, buses, commercial vehicles. The death toll would have been astronomical compared to the poor people that lost their lives. But to those 6 families, the astronomical loss is very evident every time they sit around their table and see the empty chair.
Of
so
course.
Loss of life, listen, safety comes at a price, but I realize the price cannot be exorbitant or impractical. Right now in Delaware, they're building $95 million protection around the pier. Why wasn't that done in Baltimore? That's the question. And the question will not be answered by all the people that say, oh, it couldn't have been done. You know what? It could have been done, but they don't want to answer that question.
Do you see the pressing of equal accountability, whether it be for the protections of the bridge, as well as applied to the owners, those who maintain the vessel? There was electrical failure. Initially, that's what we're hearing from some. If indeed electrical failure, that points to the maintenance of a vessel. I mean, it was no win for something that big, that close to the bridge, to be able to drag an anchor, based on all the experts that I've heard, to drag an anchor to stop it from hitting a pillar.
Well, let's talk about that for just very, very briefly, just for a second. Do I think that the ship is going to be blamed? You asked me about the legal targets. I'm not going to be involved. I've already climbed Mount Everest. I don't need to do it again. When I exonerated the pilot, that was my last pilot defense. But I will tell you, as just an observer who's very interested in this area, the things that are going to be looked at closely by anybody claiming damages would be the ship owner first. It's managed by a large conglomerate. They also have what's called a managing agent. They'll be looked at. The seaworthiness of the vessel is the one way that the vessel owner and its corporate entities can be held liable, especially if the ship is deemed to be unseaworthy. They will break what's called a limitation of liability, the plaintiffs, and they will go after the company regardless of the value of the ship, which is normally what a limitation of liability imposes. If the ship is seaworthy, they get to pay only up to the amount of the value of the ship. In this case, if the seaworthiness, which I think is going to be very, very suspect to attack, it may open up the ship owner to a lot of liability. Secondly, they'll probably look at the pilots. That's inevitable. People want to blame a human being. These pilots are the best of the best, I think, and most likely the pilot didn't have a whole heck of a lot of options. Right. Dropping anchor, as you pointed out, in a large ship like that, it's not like a car. Probably would take a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, maybe even longer, but that could have been tried. Remember, though, John Lero said it best, ships can't go where there's no water. So you stop the ship before what's called an collision, but you stop the ship before it ever collides, because bad things are going to happen. In this case, for those poor families, bad things, the ultimate bad thing happened, and the ultimate price was paid. We don't need this to happen again. We can take measures, remedial measures, not exorbitantly expensive, but prudent and safe-worthy. And I think for the welfare of the people transiting that bridge, 30,000 motorists a day, you're talking about a catastrophe waiting to happen. And the problem with Baltimore is they foresaw it in 1980, 3 years after that bridge was built.
All right. Well, still so many unanswered questions, but really appreciate your expertise and the correlations you were able to make from a calamity, a tragedy in 1980 to now this current bridge tragedy. Steve Yerrid, thank you so much.
Thank you, Samantha. I really appreciate the coverage y'all have given this. Your network's been outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And again, we're waiting.